All right. All right, everybody. Welcome. Have a seat. Hello.
Connie!
Ladies, we're going to start.
She didn't even hear me. I can't believe that.
So we're going to sing a cappella today.
We're still not listening, Steve.
I know.
Hello?
Hello, we're going to start.
Remember us?
How can you be forgotten? So we're going to start. We're going to sing a cappella today. Did you hit that? Okay. So you ought to sing along.
No, I'll hand out.
Thank you. I was going to. You ready?
Yep.
All to Jesus I surrender. All to Him I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him. In His presence daily live. I surrender all. I surrender all. All to Thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all. All to Jesus I surrender. Humbly at His feet I bow. Worldly pleasures all forsaken. Take me, Jesus, take me now. I surrender all. I surrender all. All to Thee, my blessed Savior, I surrender all. All to Jesus I surrender. Make me Savior, wholly Thine. Let me feel the Holy Spirit. Truly know that Thou art mine. I surrender all. I surrender all. All to Thee, my blessed Savior, I surrender all.
Y'all sing along on this last verse.
All to Jesus I surrender. Lord, I give myself to Thee. Fill me with Thy love and power. Let Thy blessing fall on me. I surrender all. I surrender all. All to Thee, my blessed Savior, I surrender all.
All right.
Amen. Thank you.
Ladies.
Thank you. Very nice.
Thank you. Oh, don't say that. Okay, tell Julie what I just said. All right. When you came in, there was a song sheet and then the information of the blood drive coming up. And then there's two different sign-up sheets. One is the one y'all signed up for the Valentine's session. The other one is a list by category, so that way you know how much we have of each thing, okay? And some of you have signed up for two different things, so make sure you remember, I signed up for dessert and bread or something like that. So when you leave, if you want to make sure you know what you signed up for, it's right there because it's next Wednesday, okay? All right, so can someone tell me what today is? Groundhog Day. So our question today is about Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day.
Hey, that's a good thing, though. We have to do that one time, maybe.
Yes. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's tell you what,
Okay.
it's growing and
So,
growing.
this is a tricky question because I don't think that anyone will know this. So, unless you are a Groundhog Day aficionado, I mean, you should know
Well,
everything
you know,
about
wait
it.
a minute now.
Uh-oh.
We have someone over here that
I know.
may know.
She might not. I would not doubt if Laura knows this. Because Laura, it started in what state? Laura, what state did it start in?
What?
Which state did it
What,
start?
Groundhog Day?
Yeah,
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. Yeah, I knew you knew that.
You need
Okay, so that's not the prize. The prize is, the question is, and you have to raise your hand,
Oh, my.
what year did it start?
Oh, I knew
The
that was.
very first Groundhog Day. And if you don't get it exactly, I'll take the closest. Okay? Annette?
It was in the paper this morning and I forgot what it was.
You're the winner! Just joking.
Where is that paper? I'm gonna run go see if Gail has
Well,
it.
it was today.
Yeah,
Or
but
it
what
wouldn't have been in
year?
there.
Yeah, but what year?
You're right.
Does anybody know what year it
Oh,
started?
I forgot.
Take a wild guess. Anybody? Karen?
1948.
No. 1932? No. Nope.
Any of us close?
Brenda?
45?
45? Nope.
48?
38? Nope.
37.
37? Nope.
Oh,
I'll take 3 more guesses and then I'm going to give the winner the prize to the closest date.
43.
How much?
43?
43? Nope.
25.
20, 25 is the closest. It was actually 1887.
Good.
7.
I would have not guessed that.
That's not.
That was before my time.
All right, Miss Donna. She's got a bunch of Groundhog Day jokes. I'm just joking.
Aww.
I'm sorry.
18.
Okay, I have a couple of blonde jokes.
And in 2 weeks, it'll be 2, 2, 2, 2, 2.
Use the
Oh,
glasses.
yeah, that's the date thing.
2, 2, 22.
And then in 2
That's brownie.
I know. Hello.
You gotta listen up. Donna's a soft-spoken, so.
Okay, a blonde walks into a gas station and asks an employee, I locked my keys in the car. Do you have a coat hanger or something I can stick through the window to unlock the door? 10 minutes later, a trucker comes in and can't stop laughing, so the employee asked him, what's so funny? The trucker replied, there is a blonde who is trying to open her car with a coat hanger. The employee said, so what? This could happen to anyone. The trucker explained, sure, but usually there isn't another blonde in the car that's yelling a little more to the right. Or
Oh, my goodness.
sorry about these blonde jokes, but I have lots of them.
Oh, that is so
I've
good.
read this one before, but I still like it, so I'm going to read it again. A guy took his blonde girlfriend to her first football game. They had great seats right behind the team bench. After the game, he asked her how she liked the experience. Oh, I really liked it, she replied, especially the tight pants and the big muscles. But I just couldn't understand why they were killing each other over 25 cents. Dumbfounded, her date asked, what do you mean? Well, they flipped a coin, one team got it, then for the rest of the game, they all kept screaming. All they kept screaming was, get the quarterback, get the quarterback. I'm like, hello, it's only 25 cents.
Oh, I tell you, it was all that.
Now, I told that joke before, but I didn't have people laughing.
You can tell jokes as many times you
I'm
want.
good to go.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, a little girl was talking to her teacher about whales. The teacher said it was physically impossible for a whale to swallow a human because even if it was a large mammal, its throat was too small. The little girl stated that Jonah was swallowed by a whale. Irritated, the teacher said again that a whale could not swallow a human. It was physically impossible. The little girl said, well, when I get to heaven, I will ask Jonah. The teacher asked, what if Jonah went to hell? The little girl replied, then you can ask him.
I've heard that before.
Every day the world would drag you by the hand yelling, this is important and this is important. You need to worry about this and this and this. Each day it's up to you to yank your hand back, put it on your heart, and say, no, this is what's important.
There you go.
Well, thank you, Ms. Donna. Great job. Even without the groundhog jokes, the Poxitani Phil jokes. Is that the name of the guy? For the groundhog?
Yeah.
That's all I know about groundhog jokes. I'm curious to see how accurate it's been over the years. Anybody have a percentage? I feel like somebody's probably done a study on that, like how accurate
Well, it
the...
doesn't matter because there's always 6 weeks of winter after February 2nd.
Yeah, really.
Well, there you go. Always.
Well, yeah, but it's all about the temperature, right? Like, is it going to be warmer or cooler for those last 6 weeks? I
Ask
think
the meteorologist.
I don't know which one's more accurate, to be honest with you, especially around these parts. It's been tricky. Yeah,
The article I
I mean,
read, he said, like, he's 40%.
40%.
Yeah.
I'll take those odds. It's probably better than super Doppler mega whatever. So
Indian model.
yeah. So, but she did have the football theme there with the quarterback jokes, so that was very timely as well. Appreciate that. Because we got Super Bowl coming up. How many of you guys are rooting for the LA Rams? Raise your hand if you're a LA Rams fan. You guys are like, I don't even know who's in the Super Bowl. Fair enough. I stopped watching as soon as Dallas was done. Rams or the Cincinnati Bengals. How many of you are looking for that? Yeah, I'll be rooting for those guys. Probably got some Cincinnati or at least Ohio roots in this crowd. Good Restoration Church. So, yeah, I went to school in Cincinnati for a little bit, so I kind of know the town, and I know how sad sports have been in that area for a long time. So Cincinnati hasn't seen a Super Bowl in I don't know how many years. And
Washington's got a new name.
yeah, I heard it's Washington Commanders is the name of the enemy team now. So now you know who to root against from now on for Washington. And then the Cincinnati games, the Super Bowl is actually going to be happening in Cincinnati as well. So that makes them the home team. So if you do watch the Super Bowl, rooting for Cincinnati, those Super Bowls, you kind of have people coming from all over for them. So it'll be an interesting one to watch.
Bengals will win because it is the year of the tiger.
It is. Is it really? The stars have aligned. Okay, now we know.
No paper today?
We have paper. I didn't want to give it to you too soon because I want to ask you this question. I was curious about this. I had to look this up for myself, so don't feel bad at all if you don't know this.
Oh, we won't.
Why do we have the heckler in the front row? That's what
And I thought it was just me.
all right.
It's
No, it makes it fun. How many percentage-wise of the Psalms did David write? Does anybody know that or have a guess? Percentage of Psalms. So just give me a percentage you think. We'll do it like Price is Right. If you go over, you're out. But the closest one to the number wins. Linda?
70.
No. Anybody else? Yes? Okay, you said 50 what? 50 something?
60.
60?
80?
It is roughly 50% of the Psalms, which I was surprised by. I thought it was more than that. But as far as we can tell, how the Psalms have been attributed to David, roughly 50%. There's 150 Psalms total, and then so you're looking at anywhere between 73 and 75 of them that we are fairly confident were written by David. Well, how are we fairly confident about them? They have actually been attributed to David in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which the Dead Sea Scrolls were the ones that were found that were dated to the 1st century. So those are some of the oldest manuscripts, and they have the attribution of David towards some of those psalms. So when you look in your Bible, you'll see on the top of some of those the titles that are given. Those that are attributed to David are noted there. And then sometimes you'll see a little description on what part of David's life that they could be associated to. That is a little bit more guesswork. So the connection of Psalms to the events in David's life are really more a matter of church history, how the teaching has been brought down. We don't have a bunch of manuscript or historical evidence in that, archaeological findings or anything like that that connect a specific psalm to a specific part of David's life. But what you do is you take what David's referring to in those psalms and you look at what's happening as David's life is described in 1 and 2 Samuel. And then there are times where you can make pretty close connections between the two. So all that being said, I'm going to have my partner, Steve, here, hand these out. I don't have blanks for you to fill out today, so that's some good news. But what I do have is a description of how the Psalms are associated to David, which ones are associated to him, and the ones that we can kind of take a guess at what part of David's life. You have a description of those particular Psalms to that part of David's life. And then there's a second page that actually have all the ones that are attributed to David and what the theme of those particular Psalms are.
Who wrote the rest?
So there's a variety of authors that have written the rest. Solomon wrote a couple. We have some we're not sure exactly who wrote them, but they were just connected to the Psalms through church history. There were some wise kings that wrote some, and you'll see some like towards the end. You'll notice that the ones that are attributed to David, for the most part, is what I'm trying to say, are at the beginning. The first 75 of the Psalms, roughly, are basically mostly David stuff. Everything from the second half are attributed to others.
Airman.
So you'll see those notes in your scriptures as well if we know the attribution based on textual evidence. So little information on the Psalms. Now you're thinking to yourself, well, I thought we were studying 1 and 2 Samuel in David's life. Well, today it's a little bit different. We're only going to hit a couple of verses in 1 Samuel. That's why I don't have blanks for you to fill out, because there's really not a lot of content as far as 1 Samuel that I want us to dig into. I really wanted you to see these connections between these Psalms and David. So if you are looking for some holes punched, I appreciate Angel bringing her hole puncher today. I will try to remember to get those things punched before giving them to you, but we do have a hole puncher up here. If you want to use those.
Steve will punch it.
Yeah, Steve is good at punching. So, but we will go through a couple verses in 1 Samuel, and then we're going to look at the rest of the time in the Psalms. Yesterday I did something that I don't do very often. I want to begin doing more often, which is basically kind of taking a day, getting out of the office, and praying. So for me, that's something I do best when I'm walking. Otherwise, I'll fall asleep. One way it's very difficult to make yourself fall asleep is to walk. I used to do this in college. When I was studying for a test, I'd walk and study and run into things. But the good thing about that is you have this extended period of time in prayer, and then if I need to focus my mind, what I did yesterday was I would just read through Psalms, but this time I read through the Message paraphrase of the Psalms. Have you guys heard of the Message paraphrase? Really interesting thing.
It is.
People call it translation. It's not a translation. A translation of the Bible is one where you get either a person or a group of people who take the original language and translate it into English. What Eugene Peterson did, who is the main author of the Message, is he took English translations, accurate English translations, and then he basically paraphrased those translations into the kind of wording we use in modern language, like idioms and stuff. Things that if you are coming from a foreign land and you hear people talk about it in America and you're like, I don't understand what that means, because it's just a turn of phrase that we know from culture. So what makes that appealing is it kind of breathes fresh air into maybe a text that you've read over and over again. Like if you read Psalm 23 in the Message, it kind of gives you a little bit of a perspective on what you're familiar with on a different level. So we're actually going to, I'll read a few of these Psalms out of the Message paraphrase to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. But we're going to do this connected to where David is in his life, okay? So that was all my preamble. So we'll spend some time in the Psalms and some of the ones that are actually mentioned on your sheet of paper. But we're going to do it with a mind to where David is so that we can draw a connection between what's written there in the Psalm and what the context of that Psalm is with the one who is actually writing it. So that should give us a really good connection when we're going through Psalms to see how it works in our life as well. So, where did we leave David last time? We know that he had been basically at the rock bottom point in his life. He seemed to have bottomed out at this point. We talked about crutches being removed from David's life. We had 5 of them that we talked about. Without cheating, looking at your notes, any of you remember one of the 5 that we said David had removed in his life? Major change in his life.
Friend.
Okay, close friend. Who was that? Jonathan. A really close friend finds out his dad is out to kill David, his dad being Saul. So they can't hang out anymore. Can't do any sleepovers at Jonathan's house anymore because Dad's out to get him. Okay, so a close friend. Who else? Wife. Okay, so this is the wife that was given to David as a result of his victory over Goliath. And his wife, she essentially lies to Saul to save David's life, but her lie actually gets Saul even more paranoid and after David when she said that David tried to kill her. And so by saying that, that means David and his wife can't hang out any longer as well. All right, who else?
His mentor one.
Okay, so spiritual advisor was one of those. That would have been Samuel. And then, so the other 2 aren't necessarily people. The other 2 was a good position, and then also self-esteem or self-respect. Self-respect. All right, so it started with David loses his position with Saul because Saul becomes paranoid, and then he goes to his wife has to hide him. So then he goes to Jonathan. They make an agreement to split ways. Actually, he goes to Samuel as well. Samuel tries to hide him in those condominiums in that town, if you remember. And then word gets out fairly quickly, so he can't be around Samuel. So these are all people that would be a refuge for him to be able to try to hide from this man who is bent on killing him. The last place he ends up, the place where he loses that self-respect, is in a place you would never expect him to go to, and that was the enemy territory there, Gath. Gath was the hometown of who? Goliath. Gath is like the kind of Washington, D.C. of the Philistines back then, where Goliath is from, and also where King Achish lives. King Achish is the king of the Philistines. David's going to this king to get refuge from the Israelites, his own people, because his own people are out to kill him because of Saul, right? So now he's going over to the Philistines and trying to say, hey, can you guys give me refuge? They recognize David right when he gets into town. He can't stay there because now he's got enemies on both sides, the Israelites and the Philistines. And so what does he do to save his own skin? He acts like he's an insane man, which is pretty easy to believe for a man who walks into the enemy territory and says, I'm looking for protection. So the Bible gets into really specific details, saying, hey, he lets saliva end up on his beard, he's scratching the gate, like this is basically the kind of thing that a crazy person would do. And the king, humorously, the scripture records that the king is like, I've got enough crazy people in this town, I don't need one more. That's where we leave David. And so he can't even stay there. So where is he going to go next? And that's where we pick it up. And we're in 1 Samuel 22. The first half of the verse there, verse 1, says, David departed from there, that being Gath, and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Now he's going to live in a cave. Okay, so if you've ever wondered what's going through David's mind at this point as he's escaping to this dark cave without hope, you can read about what's going on in David's mind in Psalm 142. So Psalm 142 is one that we feel pretty confident was what David was writing, or at least when he reflected back on that time in his life, he wrote these words. So I'll just read the psalm to you. It's not a long one, it's just 7 verses. But this is coming out of the Message paraphrase. David wrote, I cry out loudly to God. Loudly I plead with God for mercy. I spill out all my complaints before him and spell out my troubles in detail. As I sink in despair, my spirit ebbing away, you know how I'm feeling. Know the danger I'm in, the traps hidden in my path. Look right, look left. There's not a soul who cares what happens. Now think about this, right? Not a soul who cares what happens. He's been to all the closest people in his life. They can't protect him. He's feeling isolated. He's feeling alone. I'm up against it with no exit, bereft, left alone. I cry out, God, call out. You're my last chance, my only hope for life. Oh, listen, please listen. I've never been this low. Rescue me from those who are hunting me down. I'm no match for them. Get me out of this dungeon so I can thank you in public. Your people will form a circle around me, and you'll bring me showers of blessing. Okay? So, fascinating, right? So now, when you're reading through the Psalms, and you read so many of these things where it seems like the person writing the Psalms is upset, right? There's so many Psalms that are about, Lord, take care of my enemies, help me out in this dark place, things like that. And you're wondering, what's going on with this guy's life that he feels like he's just going through these dark places? Now we can kind of see that. What's great about that is that we can relate to that. We may not be living in a cave in Dublin, but we can certainly relate to the feeling of being unloved or isolated, or feeling like God isn't hearing us or taking care of our needs. So here you have this hero in the Bible who killed the Goliath giant, who is God's chosen man, the anointed king of Israel, in a situation that we can all relate to at some level, but none of us have related to it at the level that David is in right now, as he's there in this dark cave and saying, I don't know of a soul on earth who cares for me, right? So please, Lord, deliver me. So since the despair, he feels like he has nothing left, but in the midst of all of this, David still has not lost sight of his God. He still does not feel abandoned by God. That's the crucial thing here. You'll see the Psalms will have a structure to them that is pretty consistent throughout. There's always the beginning where God is acknowledged in some way, whether it's in a way of worship or acknowledging his power. You can see that here in Psalm 142. You can see the despair or the request from the person writing the psalm in the middle, but then it always ends in praise towards God. And so that was a poetic structure that they used in those times. And David certainly uses that consistently when he's writing the Psalms. It's called a chiastic structure, where it's praise, concern, and then praise underneath that. So you'll see that pattern. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because it never loses sight of God. Even though you're being gut honest with God, you still acknowledge God, even though it feels like you're not here. I know you are, right? And this is helpful for us because when we praise God or pray to God, that honesty, I think, is something that we are allowed to have. That's the example that we have here in Psalms. So when you feel rage towards God, or when you feel paranoia towards what's happening in your life from other people, these are all things that God has big enough shoulders to handle. And in praying in this way towards God, it actually draws you closer to him. And that's one part of David being a man after God's heart. So this is a glimpse into the part of David's heart that really only God could see at the time. So David's in despair. He's alone in the cave, but he's with God. And so then God provides an answer for his prayer right then and there. And that takes us back to 1 Samuel 22, the second half of that first verse. I'm all alone. No one knows me. No one cares for me. So here's what happens. He's there in the cave, and when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went there to him. So now you have Jesse and all the boys coming to David in this cave. Now, there was a time not too long ago when we were looking into the part in David's life where his family barely remembered that he existed, right? Oh yeah, there was that one more son that's out there in the field, when Samuel came to anoint the next king. So not much attention had been paid towards David for much of his younger life. But in the midst of this, you see this family going to seek him out. They're crawling into the cave with David. And I don't know if they're doing this because they're feeling the same paranoia, because Saul and all of these people are after David. Everybody knows that David is related to this family, and it could be that they are all in danger in some way as a result of that as well. So they could be seeking refuge along with David, or if they knew of David's despair and somehow God had been working through that to at least give him some people that knew him there in the cave as he is escaping for his life. So they're not the only ones in the cave, though. It's not just David and his family. Check out who else shows up or is already in this cave when David gets there. So here's the second verse we're looking at today. Verse 2. Everyone who was in distress, everyone who is in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul, some translations say discontented, which I like because it gives you another D. Preachers love, the keeping it alliterated. So you have in debt, discontented, and distressed. They're gathered to him. I feel like there's some scripture speaking to me. Wait a minute, is that Miss Joyce? I love it. It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Take your time. It's something that happens to all of us. In fact, I forget where it was. I think it might have been when you were doing that graveside. That's right. I had my phone on the whole time. And right after Steve had been doing the graveside service for Tammy Lemke's dad had passed away. And first time for him to do this in a long time. And I was there kind of as emotional support for him. More than anything, and did a great job with it and stuff, and then everything's over, and as I'm talking to him about how he did, my phone starts dinging, and I realized, I thought I checked it, we all thought we checked it beforehand, but it starts dinging, and I realized, man, had someone called me in the middle of this, I would have had Sanford and Sons theme song playing at a graveside, because that's the ringtone I have.
Oh my God.
So, there's Steve reading Psalm 23, though I walk through the shadow, that would have been bad. So it could happen to any of us, but for the grace of God, we're alive. So, don't feel bad at all. Where was I? All right, so the good thing is Tammy Lemke's dad was like a guy who fixed stuff all the time, and probably would have thought that was fun to hear that. Yeah. Okay, where were we? So these were the people in the cave with David, distressed, in debt, and discontented. And he became commander over all of them. And there were with him about 400 men. Now, things are about to get interesting. Okay? That's a big cave, right? So there's a series of caves. It's kind of a well-known. So this is literally, about as literal as it can get, to Skid Row in Bible times, right? So this was a well-known area in that time where people who were they did not want to be found. That's where they went. And you have hundreds of people like that, right? People who couldn't pay their bills, and so they either had to become slaves based on the debt that they had, or they were still trying to hold on to their freedom by running from anybody who could find them that they had debt toward, living in this cave. Or you had people who were, running from the law in one way or another, and then you had people who had been wronged or mistreated, the malcontents, the folks that just could not fit in society for some reason or another. They're all out there in one place, and David is the chief of them all, the commander. Of course, because he has that leadership that is developing within him. And so where Moses was watching over sheep to develop his leadership skills, David is now watching over a bunch of crazy people to develop his leadership skills. So in the days when Saul was in control, there was probably more and more people who were overwhelmed with what was happening in society, and there were probably more people who were ostracized as a result of that. So that probably caused some of the swell of people that were living in these caves. And so it's hard to have a madman given to depression as a king. And so you have David out there with a bunch of malcontents. And they probably felt the same way he did about Saul in some way or another. So imagine kind of being in a cave, feeling like a worm, only to have over 400 more worms falling in with you. But in the midst of all of that, God is working. And he can work in any situation. This is a perfect example of how he does. And so the cave turns into a training place for people who are actually beginning an army that will eventually become to be known as the David's mighty men of valor, and later in Scripture. This is where they all come from. So this is the original Robin Hood, if you will. So David, he's basically been beaten all the way down to where he is, and doesn't seem like there's anywhere to look but up. But when David does this, as we just saw in that song, when David does look up, there's God. And he's bringing other unknowns to David who would eventually prove to be the mightiest men of Israel once David fully takes the throne. And these are going to be men who are serving under him as a king. So this is a crucial turning point in David's life, where he is now accepting this position that he has in life, and he's making the best of where he is there in the caves. And so we've already looked at one psalm that gives us some insight on how David is feeling. Now I want us to see a couple more before we're done this morning. And we're not actually sure as closely positive about these psalms when they were written as we were 142. But there's a good chance that Psalm 57 was still written at a time when David was either in the cave here in the beginning or later on was still in the caves with these men running from Saul. The association you see on this, and by the way, this comes from a WordPress entry or article. You can see the web address there if you want to follow along with some of the other stuff that this author puts together. But the association there is actually when David is a little bit later into this epic cat-and-mouse game between he and Saul. So it could be then, or it could be right here around the same time that he is in the caves at Psalm 142. But however it is, Psalm 142, David seems to be on his face, right? He is just in the lowest part. But Psalm 57, we'll see David kind of lift up a little bit. He's on his knees. And then we're going to look at Psalm 34 and see David more on his feet as a result of what's happening around him. So over to Psalm 57, it says,
Have mercy on me, O God.
yes. Yes, that's a familiar phrase, isn't it? Psalm 57. Here's how the Message does it. Be good to me, God, and now I've run to you for dear life. I'm hiding out under your wings until the hurricane blows over. I call out to high God, the God who holds me together. He sends orders from heaven and saves me. He humiliates those who kick me around. God delivers generous love. He makes good on his word. I find myself in a pride of lions who are wild for a taste of human flesh. Their teeth are lances and arrows. Their tongues are sharp daggers. Soar high in the skies, O God. Cover the whole earth with your glory. They booby-trapped my path. I thought I was dead and done for. They dug a man-trap to catch me and fell in headlong themselves. I'm ready, God, so ready. Ready from head to toe. Ready to sing, ready to raise a tune. Wake up, soul. Wake up, harp. Wake up, lute. Wake up, you sleepyhead son. I'm thanking you, God, out loud, in the street, singing your praises in town and country. The deeper your love, the higher it goes. Isn't that good? The deeper your love, the higher it goes. Every cloud is a flag to your faithfulness. Soar high in the skies, O God. Cover the whole earth with your glory. See a little bit more optimism in this one, right? So David is rising to the occasion from these. And it's interesting, these references that are made in the psalm, if you look at verses 1 through 3, he's no longer looking down, he's looking up towards God. And then he says in verse 4 there, I find myself in a pride of lions, people wild for the taste of human flesh. Their teeth are lances and arrows. Their tongues are sharp daggers. Who's he talking about? These people that are around him in the cave, right? These are some violent folks, some crazy people. And they are out for blood. These are people who are wanting to maybe take revenge on why they are actually in the cave in the first place. And so David's like, I'm surrounded by these kind of people. But then verses 5 through 11 shows this transformation that's happening with David, where he is able to say, God, you're able to rise above. As low as your love has gone down to find me, it's as high as the clouds are. And from the very tip top of the earth, God, you will be praised. And we can sing in the streets about this. We don't have to hide in caves, but we can go out and praise your name. So that's the beauty of what we're able to see David is overcoming in this. And he's looking around at all these hopeless people around him in Psalm 144 and 142, but now he's looking up and he's finding hope. And then here's the third psalm that I think is good for us to see, thinking about David there in the caves with these crazy folks. Psalm 34, we'll read verses 1 through 10 of that one. Psalm 34. I forgot what it's like to turn pages in the book now. All right. This one has 22 verses. We're just going to read the first half of it. I bless God every chance I get. My lungs expand with His praise. I live and breathe God. If things aren't going well, hear this and be happy. Join me in spreading the news. Together, let's get the word out. God met me more than halfway. He freed me from my anxious fears. Look at Him. Give Him your warmest smile. Never hide your feelings from Him. When I was desperate, I called out, and God got me out of a tight spot. God's angel sets up a circle of protection around us while we pray. Open your mouth and taste. Open your eyes and see how good God is. Blessed are you who run to Him. Worship God if you want the best. Worship opens doors to all His goodness. Young lions on the prowl get hungry, but God seekers are full of God. This is written a little bit later. David's able to look back on what God has done at this point in his life, and we're going to see some of these parts as we go into David's life and as he's running from Saul, and how miraculously God works in His providence to get David out of tight spots. And David is continually recognizing God's movement now in all of this. And this is him later looking back and saying, oh, I've seen this happen, so trust God when you're in these types of situations. And so, yes?
I just wanted to mention here, in the NIV, it says at the beginning of that, it says of David, when he pretended to be insane before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he left.
Yeah, David's going to pretend.
That was interesting.
Yeah, David's going to be pretending to be insane a few times. He realized that this worked for him the first time around. He's like, I'm pretty good at acting crazy. So you'll see this happen. But it's remarkable. It's in these crazy moments like this that you see God working. And I love them. I love that God doesn't He's not this high and mighty, lofty one who doesn't get into the thick of these difficult situations. And He uses these crazy situations that oftentimes we would want to not even have to deal with or run away from to still rescue us. And so that's what He does with David. And you can see the focus here, like verse 8, if you think about the distress that we're following David, he says, open your mouth and taste, open your eyes and see how good God is. Blessed are you who run to Him. The people in debt, verse 9, worship God if you want the best. Worship opens doors to all His goodness, right? To people who are discontented in spirit, he says in verse 10, young lions on the prowl get hungry, but God seekers are full of God, pointing the discontentment towards seeking after God, as opposed to seeking after whatever it is that caused their discontentment in the first place. So it's just a good way to make the connection of the context of these Psalms so that you have a broader understanding of what's being referred to when we're reading through these. So you see this major change happening in David's attitude. He was honest enough to admit his need towards God and cry out for help. And he was humble enough to not just become angry and say, God hadn't taken care of me, I'm left here in the cave, and I'm supposed to be the anointed one. He could have become bitter, but he didn't do that. he was willing to learn from God even in those dark moments. And there are so many people in this world that we live in who will run from one cave to another of isolation and never look up and learn from God. But for us, it's not a matter of our circumstance that we find ourselves in, it's in a matter of our perspective. If we stay focused on the horizontal, all these crazy people around us, how dark this cave can be, how uncomfortable the situation I'm in is, if we just stay focused on that, it will cause us to act as crazy as David, if not worse. But if we look up and say, okay, God, how are you? I want to know how it is that you're working in this situation, because I'm asking for one thing and I'm getting another. And this seems to be what David is doing in these Psalms. And you see he gets some wisdom, some character, some perseverance, which is what James tells us is what suffering is about, what having to go through perseverance is really for. So the Christian life can sometimes include those dark caves. Swindoll writes this in his book. He says, the conversion of a soul is a miracle of the moment, but the making of a saint is the task of a lifetime. And you can think of this in David's life. David was made a king in a moment with oil, but he was built into the king. His character of a king was developed over a lifetime. And you can see that happening right before you. So that's why we go through tough times. That's why it takes us a lifetime, and we're still not done learning and developing and growing into the kind of people God has called us to be. But in the midst of all of that, everyone needs a refuge, someone who's able to hear us out, to see our ugly side, and to really be willing to say, okay, God's working through all of this. So when you don't have church, most people in our world just go to a bar for that, or whatever thing that they can go to just be able to feel like they can be themselves somewhere. This is why church is such an important thing, because we got to have the kind of welcoming environment and place that people can find as a refuge, even when they feel a little crazy. So that's what we're here for. So where do you turn when the bottom drops out on you? Who is it that you call? Where do you go? And that's something to think about. And it's pretty interesting. Angel provided this devotional that she picked up this morning. She's reading through this, and this was the devotional for the day. But I think it just ties in. She didn't know we would be talking about Psalms and songs of worship and how it can help us process things. But she brought this up to me this morning and said, I see the connection between what we're talking about here, and what David did to deal with these emotions that he had with this devotion. So I'm just going to read it to you and see if you can make the same connection. Canadian Brian Dorkson wrote the familiar worship song, Come, Now is the Time to Worship. We haven't sung that in a while, but that's the one, Come, Now is the Time to Worship. We're done with the acapella singing. One day every tongue will confess you are God. You guys know that one? Okay. The guy who wrote that song, in a lunchtime interview at his home, he told me that he composed it during a time of deep anguish in his soul. One day he felt especially discouraged. He sensed the Holy Spirit nudging him to praise and worship the Lord despite the difficulties. He obeyed, and this song, which has blessed millions worldwide, was born. And of course, you guys have heard of other songs that are like this, right? Even hymns that have been written. It Is Well With My Soul is probably the most famous story of being written out of a place of darkness, a cave, if you will. So hearing about Brian's choice to worship in adversity forever altered my perspective. It's easy to worship Jesus for his goodness and presence and power when life's going well, not so much when life takes a sudden detour or someone hurts me. That's when I'm tempted to whine or doubt, but that's exactly when I most need to recall that song title and put it into action. Now, in the middle of the muck, is the time to worship Jesus. He doesn't want me to wait until I've worked through my disappointment or healed from the pain to enter his courts with praise. Worshiping in spirit and in truth means coming to him as I am with all my warts, rather than putting on false airs or waiting until circumstances are ideal. It's acknowledging his beauty, faithfulness, goodness, and wisdom, and inviting his majesty to sit on the throne of my heart now, at this very moment. Worship won't change my circumstances, but it changes the way I respond to them. I don't need to figure everything out before I engage in praise. I just need to worship, especially when life doesn't make sense. Amen?
Amen.
All right. I thought that was useful and helpful. I appreciate you passing that along.
Oh, morning
And
to Jesus.
good insight. Yeah. So that's what we have for today. Not a whole lot of blanks to fill in, but still hopefully gave us some good perspective and encouragement on where we find ourselves, whether they be good days or difficult days. Never feel alone. Never, never feel alone. You always have God there, and He can take all of your worst emotions and fears, anger, and He responds to them with wisdom. And you also have people here, too, who love you and want to help or just be a listening ear. So never find yourself isolated when you're a part of God's church. All right? So let's talk about some stuff people are going through that we can encourage and be praying for along the way. Steve is turning another year older, so we need to be praying for him. His birthday's coming up.